Hi, I am, as announced, Jeanna Smialek. I'm the Brussels Bureau Chief here for the New York Times. I am excited to welcome you to this panel, Trade Wars and a New Economic Order. We are going to talk today about what the implications are for Europe and for the world of the ongoing trade wars, what it means for a rule-based order to move to a more fragmented and more transactional world, and what U.S. trade and industrial policy are doing to alter the landscape of global trade. We have a great panel for you today to discuss these important questions. Michał Baranowski is the Undersecretary for State at the Ministry of Economic Development and Technology in Poland, which, as you likely know, currently holds the Council presidency here in Brussels. Tatiana Prazeres is the Foreign Trade Secretary at the Ministry of Development, Industry, Trade, and Services in Brazil. And Tobias Meyer is the CEO of the DHL Group, obviously a leading logistics and package delivery company in Germany. I would like to invite the panel up to the stage, and we will get started.
Hi, Jeanna. Oh, I walk fast.
Tatiana, I wanted to start with you. I'm going to ask the entire panel sort of a broad framing question, which just tackles head-on the title of this panel, which is, is this a new economic order? Have we fundamentally changed the global trading system? And you and I were talking in advance of the panel about the fact that this isn't your first time in government, so you have a sort of interesting insight into whether this is an actual fundamental shift from what we've seen before. So I was hoping you could walk us through what you're seeing.
Yeah, thank you, Jeanna. Indeed, the trade policy landscape is changing dramatically, right? We're moving to something new. We can discuss how to call it, but it can be a geo-economic order. And that reflects different views on trade. It reflects different perceptions about trade being more, not only an opportunity creator, but also trade being perceived as a threat. This intersection between trade and national security is more evident than ever. Trade being somehow used as a tool for geopolitical objectives, for strategic concerns. This is all new, and that changes in trade policy in a very significant way. So I think I would underscore this perception of trade being a tool for geopolitical purpose is something that characterizes this new environment that we are entering. We can discuss how far we are. From a liberal order to a geo-economic order, we're in transition, but views on trade policy have changed fundamentally all over the world.
Interesting. And Michael, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how you see this from Europe and what you think this moment means for the European Union.
Well, it is, I agree also that this is a moment of change. Paradigm is changing. We know that it's changing. We don't know what will come at the end. For the EU, it is certainly a moment of trial and moment of keeping our unity. And as a presidency of the EU Council, that's our main job. It's a bit like herding cats, but in a positive way, and we are sticking together. But because this moment is happening vis-a-vis our closest ally, United States, and because we are, frankly, the most important economic partner for the United States, this feels different. And there are connections between trade, geopolitics, to some extent, maybe not yet security, but this is on everyone's mind. We are figuring it all out at the same time. It's clear that, fortunately, this moment also creates this push for reforms that we need in Europe. You hear about simplification or deregulation, completing the internal market. That's all pushing us in this direction, and Europe is standing on our 2 feet when it comes to security and defense, also because of this external push. But trade has never been as political as it is right now. And I will finish with this, I was struck by this listening. Some of you may know that there was a recent presidential election in Poland, and it was a good chunk of the debate between the candidates was about trade and economics. And I was struck by this because 5 years ago, it was not even on the radar screen.
Yeah, interesting. I want to quickly follow up on that. You say that it's a little bit like herding cats. What grade would you give Europe on keeping everybody together?
A+.
A+. A+.
In the American system, in Poland we have from 1 to 5, and you get 6 for exceptional job. No, look, it's both the council stood behind the commission, and Maroš Šefčovič, the commissioner, and President von der Leyen has done a really great job in this very difficult situation, and everyone knows that we are in the midst of a pretty tough negotiations. But yes, A+ for effort for sure.
And you have a rapidly approaching deadline in those tough negotiations, July 9th. Do you think there's going to be a trade deal before that?
Absolutely, there is going to be a great deal. Well, no, the fact is that, so I cannot say anything different, but we are moving forward. The United States is also determined to get a deal. So far, there has not been a great number of deals. The deadline is pushing both sides closer to a solution. I know that President Trump is frustrated with the speed. We in Europe would like to get faster to a deal. We have great negotiators, and I really do hope that we get to a deal, recognizing the fact that right now Europe has decided to pause on our retaliatory measures, while United States decided to fire and then double it when it comes to steel and aluminum. So I think the beginning of July is going to be a very interesting moment.
All right, I've got one more follow-up, and then I'll let you out of the hot seat, I promise. But when you say that it's both sides are feel the pressure, getting closer to a deal, like what's evidence of that? Like, how do we know the sides getting closer to a deal?
So one evidence is so last week a number of us were at the OECD ministerial. Maroš was there, Commissioner Šefčovič was there, talked with Jameson Greer, USTR. They had a very good conversation that is getting us from the moment of, maybe 3 weeks ago, we were probably in the lowest moment where we were threatening each other with really high hikes in tariffs. So both sides are talking, exchanging papers. Now that we are talking, because for a good chunk of the time we were not talking enough, there is a sense of things moving, and also perhaps US is also de-escalating when we look at conversations with China and others.
Okay, interesting. All right, Tobias, I think after all of this policy, it would be great to hear a little bit from industry. From your perspective, does it look like we're in a moment of fundamental change? And as this plays out, are you guys seeing it affect your bottom line? Is this showing up in your business?
So I think we definitely see a lot of changes in trade flows, triggered primarily, not exclusively, but primarily with this change in US trade policy. It's quite obviously on the Trans-Pacific, where we have not only seen changes in tariff rates, but also some changes in customs regulation. So in February, we already had the first phase where there was no de minimis for 4 days. That led to a backlog in American airports, which increasingly led to chaos, and then it was revoked. The express industry, also experienced that when the IEEPA tariffs came first into place. That had the unintentional consequence that a simplified clearance procedure was wiped out for a certain value range, $800 to $2,500, which then was also rectified. So I think I see also something positive in that the US administration is acting if it is against American interest. If the American consumer is exposed to inconvenience, if American business interest is harmed, and I think the Annex 2 is a living witness list of who has influence in terms of products being exempted and who is able to get their products on that exemption list. So it has a profound effect on trade flows, and even things like what was agreed now with the UK. I'm not sure whether it constitutes a deal or not. Some of us were used to trade deals being quite detailed, 2 pages It's hard to imagine that all details are fully thought through, but maybe it's in the middle of the process. I don't know. But still, I mean, it is a profound change. 10, 20% is still 4-8 times higher what was there before. And this will have a profound impact on business. And it's an interesting question how business leaders are going to react. I mean, how do you do business case? Do you build something in the US purely based on tariffs? You know, if you're wrong, you build a steel plant, you will probably have your first production in 2030, 2031. What's the tariff level in 2030? I think that's a question where some people are not so quite sure what the answer is. And this is why I think also investments are not really taking place, I think, at the pace that people envision. Business doesn't like uncertainty. That's the case in Europe, and that's also the case in the US.
That's interesting. And when you talk to policymakers, what is your message for them? Like, what do you think policymakers should be doing to try to de-escalate this, to improve the certainty?
Well, look, we are not in the business of, not a consultant in the political space, but I think we share what we observe. And what I think is important to understand is the list of objectives that the US has is pretty long. Some of those, I think we now recognize are legitimate. I think the most obvious, Europe hasn't done enough on defense. Okay, we get that. Now, that doesn't have something so closely to do with trade, but it is an objective that the US had, and I think it's now commonly recognized that this was a valid interest and concern. But if you think about the security concerns more broadly, particularly relating to China, I think this trade policy strengthens China significantly. The growth that you have seen in global trade over the last 5 years was the strongest of the underlying countries with China. The growth in intra-Asia trade, the growth Africa, the growth Middle East with China, China not only being a source of imports, but also the largest buyer of Middle Eastern oil by now. So those relationships have significantly changed over the last 5 to 10 years. And I think China sees this distancing of the US from Europe and the rest of the world also as an opportunity.
Interesting. And you had some interesting comments just last week, actually, about China. You suggested that, even if there isn't a good outcome with US, the EU is not going to make a pivot toward China. I wonder if you could unpack that for us a little bit. What did you mean?
Sure. This was reflecting the conversations we had in the council. And I would summarize it in such a way that even though we have difficult issues now with the US, we are in difficult negotiations, but it doesn't mean that all of our difficult challenges with China just go away because of this. So these two processes are going in parallel, both in terms of our trade, but also foreign direct investment, also the investment, and what we need China to do when China wants to invest in Europe. So this is, China is in the middle of a charm offensive, but I'm not hearing from my ministers in the council that anyone wants to sort of switch the gear. Europe is going to diversify. We remember that US is about 13% of global GDP, 13% of the global trade, so we have 87% to play with. So we are very much engaging, Commission is engaging on behalf of the EU in negotiation with Indonesia and India, but we have real issues to solve with China at the same time. But I hope that we can get to a good transatlantic deal because it will make our conversations with China a little bit more predictable and stable, because also governments, not only businesses, but also governments need the predictability in our economic and trade relations.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Obviously, one of the other trade deals you all have been working on is with Mercosur. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about both, what you think the status of that is likely to be, how this plays into it, but then also more in general, how is Brazil approaching that diversification of trading partners?
Sure. No, thanks. Happy to talk about it. I've been really involved in these negotiations. So we announced the conclusion of the talks last December, and now we need to go through its approval here in the EU and Mercosur side as well. But listen, our message is that this is a win-win agreement. This is important from an economic perspective. We're talking about the largest agreement between two trade blocs, $22 trillion in GDP combined. It's important in trade terms, in investment terms, partnerships, etc. It's important from a sustainability standpoint. So we have negotiated, we, Mercosur, and the EU. It's going to be an annex to this Trade and Sustainable Development chapter of the agreement, but basically it contains commitments on both sides towards sustainability on its three pillars: economic, social, environment. So if the agreement never enters into force, it will be a huge missed opportunity in terms of making sure that these commitments are really mandatory binding, right? But I think this agreement is particularly important given the geopolitical landscape. So I think the current international scenario just makes this agreement even more important. In a context where barriers are being erected, I think this agreement is a bridge between two regions that have shared values, objectives, history. This is a really important agreement that we hope enters into force. And I think on our part of the world, there is a real commitment towards it. Yeah. And I think, getting back to your question about how that relates to everything we've been discussing, I think some countries will respond to these tensions with retaliation. Maybe many are concerned with the risk of trade deflection. So if goods do not enter markets that they used to, where these goods will end up in, and this is a concern that we have as a country. So the risk that this economic nationalism somehow spreads out is one. But at the same time, what we see is countries willing to deepen their relations with like-minded partners, with countries that value rules-based trade. And I think our relationship with the EU somehow fits in the second category. We see the current landscape as an opportunity for us to really implement this agreement, and more than that, deepen our connections with the EU.
Although there's still frequently skepticism here in the EU about Mercosur, there's a reason it hasn't been fully enacted, right? And so, we still see skepticism from the French in particular. Macron was asked about this last week and played a bit coy on it. I wonder if you think that those obstacles are surmountable, and I wonder what kind of timeline you think we might be looking at.
So I hope they are. I would not get into how EU countries see this. Maybe Michael can comment on that. I don't know. But frankly, taking a broader perspective on this issue, it would be a huge missed opportunity for the two sides. I would not say to whom. It's a bigger opportunity missed. But I hope we can get to the finish line. So where we are today is that we are finishing the legal scrubbing of the agreement. We're starting the translations, and my understanding, and the President of the European Union Council was in Brazil maybe 2 weeks ago. I think he mentioned that the idea was to submit it to the Council in the near future. So let's see how that goes. But on our side, I will not comment on the EU mechanics. But on our side, our expectation is that the agreement's finally signed in Brazil next semester, because Brazil will hold the Mercosur interim presidency, and we hope it is signed there. And then we have, if everything goes well, in the EU, it's the analysis by the Parliament. And we, of course, have in each of the 4 Mercosur countries parliamentary approval as well.
What do you think? Well justified?
Yeah, this is a little bit tricky. You know why? And I'm not sure if because I'm both in a chair as the EU Council presidency, but also Polish minister, and Polish government made it very clear that we have still outstanding issues with the deal. It was very clearly communicated last December. We are now waiting for the text, for the legal scrubbing. That's the basis of final conversations. We are having a lot of conversations both with the Commission but also with other member states that have some concerns. There is, I won't make news to say that there isn't unanimity or unity on Mercosur, and you know, here it's when we have the final text, that's where the game will really start coming to an end, where this goes. But EU is certainly very focused on diversifying the trade, and there is a lot of what Minister said, what Tatiana said, the commonality in we are as EU looking to other partners that cherish rule-based, predictable trade system.
That absolutely makes sense. Another big issue that I think comes up quite often when we're thinking about the future of rule-based trade is that it seems to have become sort of inextricably linked with defense. And so we've got the NATO summit coming up in a few weeks. It's obviously in the middle of all of these intense trade negotiations. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you see those linkages playing out. Does this affect, you know, how you approach the Commission approaches negotiation? Like, how should we think about the sort of security side of this at the same time as we're dealing with the trade side of this?
Yeah. Well, so fortunately, these issues are not linked, nor is anyone linking them directly. And I think that's very good, because we can be competing with each other economically, we can be negotiating with each other when it comes to trade, and we can be strong security partners. Now, the next few weeks will be very busy and important, because we'll have the G7 summit in Canada, followed by the NATO summit in The Hague, followed by the European Council. And the European Council will be the final moment where our prime ministers, presidents come together, the leaders come together to look at how the last few weeks played out. The summit, the NATO summit, I think is now in a place, I'm sure we'll talk much more about it at Brussels Forum, but there is the defense ministers came to a very clear line toward an agreement, very ambitious agreement, raising goals for defense spending very much in line with what our responsibilities are. And I'm speaking, you know, Poland is the country that will spend almost 5% on defense, more than anyone else in NATO, but others have a lot to a lot of catching up to do. That's what American administrations asked for very, very long time. We are getting there. And I think it's going to be, so in the best case scenario, we'll have success on security and defense and success on trade. And, you know, that's where we need to get to eventually anyways. I just hope that we'll get there in, you know, early July rather than a few months later.
Okay, makes sense. Tobias, I wonder, as you look toward the future, how you expect this all to play out. How do you plan? How are you planning for your business? What are you expecting as you think about 1 year, 2 years in the future? What's the global trading system going to look like?
Well, I think on some of these questions, if you look longer term, it's important to go back to the fundamentals, right? The European Union as a peace project primarily, which I think is still very important to emphasize, even though it obviously also plays a strong economic role. And as it relates to trade, that trade has in their libraries full of scientific evidence is increasing global wealth and through the affordability of goods, but also, and this is often forgotten, innovations spread largely through trade. You know, a modern vaccine is not going to be made in every country in the world. You have significant economies of scale to producing that. You have economies of skill. So, and the rise of manufacturing nations like China prove how an export-led model can lead to significant economic success and significant proliferation of wealth. And I think this is very important to keep in mind, also here in Europe. If you constrain trade, it has an economic price. Now, you might be willing to pay that for defense reasons, for security reasons, okay, but it's absurd to believe that the pie is going to stay at the same size if you have significant trade barriers. The pie is going to get smaller. As the pie gets smaller with over-regulation and too much bureaucracy, which is also a point to make in this town. So I think we still believe and we see evidence that nations will favor and to some extent be forced to trade, to participate, and also satisfy their populations as it relates to relative wealth, but also as it relates to access to modern healthcare and similar achievements of mankind. So there will be ups and downs. We're clearly not at the up currently, at least emotionally. It feels more like a trough. I have not much hope that it will get better in the coming months, but we'll see. But fundamentally, we're an optimist. And again, global trade is still growing, and it's mainly growing in and outbound of China. I think it's very important to note that.
Interesting, interesting. Michael, if you had to fast forward a year, where do you think the EU is a year from now? What does its trading relationship with the US look like? What's your best guess at what a deal ends up looking like? Yeah. Where are we?
Yeah, so it's so hard to say. When you say a year, it's such an incredible long time. I mean, it's been. So we've been doing this Polish presidency of EU Council for 5 months and 10 days or so, or 11 days.
Who's counting?
It's exactly, it's the longest period of my life, it seems. So a year is a very, very long time. But the fact is that I think, look, our interests transatlantically lie together, right? So if the bottom line interests win, we'll get some adjustment to our trade volumes and terms. And right now it's important to remember that if you look at both goods and services, EU has a tiny 3% surplus with the US. We are talking about 3% of trade. Now, currently, the US administration is focusing on the goods part, where there is a bigger US deficit. So there will have to be some adjustment. But in the end, actually, very much agreeing, we are all benefiting from this. American people are benefiting from this. Europeans are benefiting. So if we really enter a trade war, everyone would lose. So we'll get to deals. We'll get to deals. Now, it's hard for me to predict what it will entirely look like. I know that in Europe, there is definitely a desire, appetite for something that is more ambitious than agreement, for example, with UK that you mentioned. And EU is big, and the approach has been speak softly, negotiate, but carry big stick. So I think both sides have a big incentives to come to a conclusion. The sooner the better.
And do you expect that obviously an important part of the UK blueprint is that the 10% universal tariff remains in place. Do you have any forecast on whether that's the case for the EU deal?
So I can say that one minister, Swedish minister, Benjamin, said that this would not be. He said that would not be acceptable. I think there is appetite for something more ambitious than that. It's that would be a big change.
You just answered that question like such a journalist.
You got to train. Being think tanker is you can be so much more honest and just open. Not that I'm dishonest. I'm very honest. But you can be less diplomatic than someone who then carry responsibility.
Now you have to quote your colleagues. Yeah. And final question. I just wonder, if you can put this in global perspective for us. Where do you think we are? Where's Brazil a year from now? But also, where's the global trading system a year from now?
Yeah, it's a big question for 2 seconds, I'm afraid. But very quickly, listen, for Brazil, Brazil is relatively distant from the geopolitical hotspots of our times. And this is an asset for us, an asset that we want to preserve, that we want to appreciate, and but we're part of this this global context. And I think the challenge for us will be to navigate these geopolitical tensions of our times in a good way, in a proper manner, in a way that preserves our interests. And this will mark our relations as we move forward. China has been the largest trading partner of Brazil since 2009. Our trade with China is more than twice our trade with the US. And we're very committed to finding a negotiated solution with the Americans as well. So navigating this complicated scenario, the intricacies of these complicated relationships will be a challenge for Brazil, and a challenge for most of the world that frankly is not willing to take sides. I think here, of course, the conversation is mostly transatlantic, but it's important to bear in mind that most of the world is sharing the challenge that Brazil has in terms of how to deal with the current circumstances, preserving your own interests.
Yeah, well, it is a challenge that I think we'll be talking a lot about in the next couple of months. Thank you all so much for the panel. It's been a great discussion. Really appreciate it.